release of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the Pokédex is now up to 1,008 Pokemon. Side note, congrats for Ash finally becoming Pokemon Master. Every time a new game comes out and new Pokemon are announced, there are always at least a few complaints about some of the designs. These don't look like real Pokemon. With the announcement of official 1,000 Pokemon Goldfango, and mixed opinions on this Golden Gumby design, I thought it would be a good idea to go back and reflect on past Pokemon. People always have mixed opinions when new Pokemon come out and whether or not they look like actual Pokemon, or are they just lazy designs. But the feeling usually goes away once you're able to interact with them. They start to feel like they're part of the world, or at least that's how it goes with me. We don't like new things. It makes us uncomfortable. New Pokemon feel intrusive to our established idea of what Pokemon are. Usually, you have to get used to the design. But there are always a few that never truly feel like Pokemon, even throughout the years. I'm looking back at Generation 1 through 8, including Pokemon Go and Legends of Arceus. Scarlet and Violet have just come out, and I haven't played it yet. The Pokemon are still too new, and I haven't had a chance to interact with the new Pokemons, so I don't feel like I can give them a fair assessment on whether or not they feel like real Pokemon. So we're not touching on Scarlet and Violet today. There is no Mr. Rhyme or Reason for... There is no Mr. There is no Mr. Rhyme or Reason for what I consider real Pokemon. I just went through the Pokédex and felt out the vibes of each Pokemon. Just to clarify, any Pokemon that appear on this list does not mean I don't like them or their design, even though it might feel like it because I'm gonna be picking apart some of their designs. They just don't give me the Pokemon vibes, you know? First up on this list is the CLEFAIRY evolution line. Just a side note, I apologize for any mispronunciation of any Pokemon names. I will try my best to look them up before saying them, to make sure, but I'm trying my best. Looking back through Generation 1 Pokemon, there are a lot of plain designs, and I feel like CLEFAIRY suffers from this a little bit. But that is not necessarily a bad thing, but that's not the reason why I have them on this list. This is a good first Pokemon for this list because it will show how nonsensical this list really is and how personalized it is to me. I associate CLEFAIRY with the anime Season 2, Episode 7, CLEFAIRY Tales. This episode has stuck with me since I first saw it, and it made me look at CLEFAIRY as more of an alien than anything, because they kinda are. Not all extraterrestrial Pokemon feel non-Pokemon, but in this episode, the CLEFAIRY literally crash land on Earth and are flying a spaceship and they have to rebuild it. The original Pokemon show was kinda wild, honestly, if you think about it. Next up is PSYDUCK. Golduck looks very Pokemon-like to me, but there's something off about PSYDUCK that just does not sit right with me. It may be the fact that he was super annoying in the show, and growing up, I never liked his design, and wished he would evolve into Golduck, because Golduck's super cool. And I have a PSYDUCK mini. I can take his bill off, and it looks terrifying. Next up is the MACHOP evolution line. Now, the humanoid Pokemon have always been a tad bit creepy and never have sat right with me. Maybe it's from when I was young and I just wanted animalistic Pokemon, but this comic kinda drove it home. Humanoid Pokemon are just weird. I did not put a lot of them on this list, I promise. Some of them are just a little more unsettling than others. The MACHOP line just looks like really buff dudes, and it seems weird to put them in a Pokeball to fight mice, birds, and flowers. And then there's this monstrosity in Sun and Moon, the Machamp mount. Like, what the why is this basically the cover of a cheesy smut romance book? Next up is Rapidash, the original. Okay, this is probably the first one of the list that I actually like, but something about its design feels a little too detached from Ponyta, and from the rest of Gen 1. I know, it's a flaming horse with fire coming out of its head and butt, but it feels too lifelike. Even though the Alolan form looks like they just ripped out a character from My Little Pony, at least its horn is not some weird fleshy bum protruding out of its face. Sorry, Rapidash, I do love you. Next up is Grimer and Muck. What is there to say? Come on, just look at it. This thing is literally a puddle of slimy gunk. And let's not bring up the whole Ekans, a snake backwards, and Muck is... With Pokemon design based off of dogs, birds, bugs, and ducks, something based off of Muck is a bit weird and feels off. Its Alolan form is not much better either. Next up, DROWZEE and HYPNO. There's not much I can say about these two because they have really cool looking designs. But just like PSYDUCK, I can't put my finger on why they don't feel like Pokemon. Maybe it's from the anime where they were used like drugs to make people sleep and do weird animal sounds. It really freaked me out as a child, so I see them in a different light, even to this day. I know, it's weird, but on to the next. Next up, Electrode. Don't get me wrong, Voltorb is cool. He's mean, not green, and an explosion machine. Voltorb should have been the final form. Electrode just has the face of a pre-evolution, and its face seems to look a little out of place, like it belongs in a different franchise or something like Spyro. Next up, Hitmonchan. For the second half of the fighting duo Hitmonlee, they both look kinda funny, but Hitmonlee looks like he belongs as a Pokemon. Hitmonchan is wearing humanistic clothes and punching gloves. He just looks a little too humanistic, even for humanoid Pokemon standards. Next up, Mr. Mime and Mr. Rime. Continuing pooping on humanoid Pokemon, Mr. Mime is creepy as can be. Honestly, he looks like someone dressed up as a weird-looking mime and committed to the bit a little too hard, and he refuses to break character in order to inform people he is in fact not a Pokemon. Ash's mom needs to watch out. Mr. Rime is not any better. Mime Jr. is the only good thing to come from this evolution line. Next up, Ditto. This was a difficult one to put on the list. Ditto is so popular and important to the games for breeding. His cute little failed face transformations are so iconic and make very popular plush toys. Despite him being everywhere, I think his shapeshifting works against him when it comes to feeling like a Pokemon. Do you see Ditto or as a Pokemon molding block? Poor Ditto can't just be himself. But his true form is just a gelatinous blob, and it's just weird looking for a Pokemon. Next up, Porygon. This one makes sense why it doesn't feel like a Pokemon, because it's an artificial Pokemon made out of code. Aren't all Pokemon technically? He's really cool looking and gives off Digimon vibes, but Pokemon? Dude, you're in the wrong series. Phew! Finally out of Generation 1. Despite being the originals, the ones that set the foundation for what Pokemon are, I sure felt like there were a lot of Gen 1 Pokemon that did not feel like Pokemon. Now, onwards. Next up, XATU. Honestly, XATU is probably my favorite Pokemon design-wise. I always want to use him on my team, but can never really justify it. Unfortunately, his design works against him when it comes to fitting in as a Pokemon. He is supposed to be designed based off of a totem pole, so him not being expressive or very animated makes sense. But also, makes him feel like his own separate thing. It has mythical powers for it to be able to see past and future at the same time, and has always felt mysterious. I love this dude to death, but definitely not the first thing I think of when I think of Pokemon. Next up, we have SLOWKING. I gotta blame the second movie for this one. When I see him, all I see is this wise talking old guy. Next up, GRANBULL. I love Snubbull, but GRANBULL feels a bit off as a Pokemon. Maybe it's because he reminds me of something I would see in Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry or something. I was gonna say he looks like something you would see in a Saturday morning cartoon, but Pokemon kind of falls under that category, so moving on. Next up, Gardevoir. I love this whole evolution line, and I gotta blame the fandom for this one. There are a lot of Pokemon that are sexualized, but I feel like Gardevoir is the top one. Next up, Spiritomb. It's just a twirling vortex of spirits. It's not like most ghost Pokemon where spirits are bound objects. It's just full-blown naked spirits. Get some clothes, Spiritomb! Next up, ROTOM. It's not as much as ROTOM's main form, but all of his forms. Especially the fact that he is able to communicate to people like a more sentient Alexa or Google. In Sword and Shield, he's used in a lot of electronical devices that I regularly forget he's supposed to be a Pokemon and you can actually use him as a Pokemon. Next up, TYMPOLE. JJ the jet plane. That's all I'm gonna say. Next, COFAGRIGUS. I love Yamask, and COFAGRIGUS isn't that bad himself. For me personally, I have a hard time with a lot of ghost Pokemon because they're just spirits that took over objects, so their designs are just everyday objects with faces on them. Some are really cool, but some just don't feel right. TRUBBISH evolution line. Why? Just why? What about a moving pile of trash screams Pokemon? Next, we have GOTHITA evolution line. I want to love this evolution line. I truly do. But it feels too much like people. Everyone in this evolution line suffers from this. I want to go up to it and have a conversation, more so than I want to go attack it with a piece of sentient steel. Next up, LURANTIS. I have already expressed how I hate Pokemon designs that are wearing human clothes. I love everything about the design. It's beautiful, except the fact that it looks like it's wearing striped pants. I don't know why it throws me off, but it's literally the only thing that's preventing me from feeling like it's Pokemon. Next, BRUXISH. 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 Next, BRUXISH. Pokemon has some really cool looking fish Pokemon, but BRUXISH is a really uniquely designed Pokemon, and it's kind of scary looking, not in a good way. It feels out of place because of how colorful it is. It has a lot of vibrant colors, and none of them feel unified to the Pokemon world. I know some fish have some really cool colors in real life, but it feels a little too much for a Pokemon. Next up, Ultra Beasts. All of them. It makes sense because they're extra-dimensional beasts. Because of this, they're not really supposed to resemble Pokemon, but their existence seems really strange. I always forget that they exist, and I get kind of irritated when I'm reminded. I don't know why they bother me so much. Like, I like a lot of their designs, just not for Pokemon. Next is MELTAN and MELMETAL. I kind of feel bad for putting them on the list because I haven't really got a chance to interact with them. I don't play Pokemon Go, and that's the only game they've been introduced to. MELMETAL's design is metal, pun intended. He's a big, beefy, molten metal dude, and it's hella sick. I hope he gets introduced into a main game at some point without having to go through Pokemon Go, but since he's been around for a while, I feel like it's safe to put him on this list. He does not feel like a Pokemon to me, simply because I haven't got to interact with him yet. Next up, MORGREM. His first form and last form are so sick, but MORGREM is too teenage angst and impish. He is anime antagonist material for sure, just not Pokemon anime. Next up, Sword and Shield fossil Pokemon. All combinations. Why? Because they're sad. They're just sad. They're just parts of Pokemon that are smashed together to make one sad monstrosity. These Frankenstein Pokemon look too sad to be Pokemon. They give off sad vibes, not pokey vibes. Finally, Enamorous. Again, I felt bad to put this one on the list because I haven't played Legends of Arceus. He doesn't have the advantage of me knowing he even existed before making this list. His design felt so off I had to put him on the list though. He looks like a One Piece character meets Dragon Ball Z. Nothing about him screams Pokemon. His other form on the other hand, knocks it out of the park. Damn. But this guy, oof. Well, that wraps up my list for Pokemon that don't feel like Pokemon. This list was very subjective and by no means I dislike any of these Pokemon. I even have used a few of them on my main teams before. This list is ever changing, so even after uploading this video, I may have different feelings about some of these Pokemon. Are there any Pokemon that you've never felt belonged in Pokemon? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching.